Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf nun hey. This is the daf for the first day of Pesach. So Chag Sameach to everyone, and we will get started from the bottom of Nun Dalet Amud Bet. We ended with the statement of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who basically says that when you redeem something, sanctity, from one thing to another, you add a chomesh, but that's only the first act of redeeming. If you remove that sanctity onto something else, you wouldn't be adding another chomesh. To which we brought a braita where it showed the source for this, because it says, in babehema hatme'ah. If in, now this is a limitation, if in the animal that is impure, then you're going to redeem it, and then you're going to add the fifth. So they say this is limiting it to a particular case where it has to be similar to the behema hatme'ah, just like a behema hatme'ah is the first stage of sanctity and not the end stage, because an animal that's sanctified, which is impure, doesn't get offered on the temple. It's not the last stage of sanctity. You basically have to remove it onto something, move the sanctity onto something else and use it for whatever might be needed in the temple. So, right, you're not going to use a non-kosher animal in the temple. It's useless. So since it's not the last stage, then we're basically going to say the last stage doesn't have chomesh, and from there we learn also the middle stage. Now the Gemara is going to question this, and we're going to have a bit of a back and forth with Ravina. So Rav Ashi asked Ravina, Amar le Rav Ashi, the Ravina last line in Najalat Amud Bet, Behemat me'ah b'tchilat hekdesh ita be'emtza hekdesh leita, but I don't understand. An impure animal, we said it's first stage, it's not last stage. Well, it's not last stage, it could be middle stage. So this pasuk which says behemat me'ah could be saying first stage sanctity and second stage sanctity if you're going to turn it into something else and then turn it into something else again. In other words, remove sanctity from one animal onto another, and then that animal onto something else. So maybe each time you would have to add chomesh. It says behemat me'ah, anything that would be true for behemat me'ah. Behemat me'ah could be middle stage, just can't be last stage. So Amalei, to which Ravina answers Ravashi, lepisha ena b'sof hekdesh. Well, the reason is because it's not b'sof hekdesh. So basically, because it doesn't have end game of truma of sanctity, so we're not going to add chomesh even at the middle stage. So Amalei Rav Acha midifti leRavina. Rav Acha midifti continues to question Ravina and says, "Be'emtza hekdesh mia ita velosif nami chomesh." But what's the difference? In other words, why are you comparing it to end stage hekdesh? Since behemat me'ah could be first stage or second stage, right? Middle stage. So, and you could redeem it onto something. And the pasuk says chomesh, so you should add chomesh to it. So Amalei harehu kesof hekdesh. So we answer him, no, we're really going to compare it to end hekdesh. Masof hekdesh eno mosif chomesh, af emtza hekdesh eno mosif chomesh. We're going to basically say emtza hekdesh is like sof hekdesh. And since, right, Rashi adds a little bit more here, because otherwise he's just basically stating what he said before. Rashi says in af emtza hekdesh, he says without any limitation in the pasuk, we would know that sof hekdesh should own a chomesh because there is no chomesh to add when it's the last stage of hekdesh. So if it's trying to limit something, it must be limiting emtza hekdesh, the middle stage. But still, that's not satisfactory. Amalei Rav Zutra, Bered Rav Meir Ravina, my chazev to kamidame le sof hekdesh, nidamya le tchilat hekdesh. But if you're going to compare, right, emtza hekdesh, it seems, why should emtza hekdesh be so, right, second stage, be so similar to end stage? For the same token, by that same token, it could be similar to first stage hekdesh. In other words, the first stage is similar to the second stage, and that both can be redeemed onto something else. The end stage is similar to the middle stage because both have something that was sanctified before it. So it's a little bit arbitrary. So Amalei, he says, really, it makes the most sense to compare it to the end stage of hekdesh, which is why it doesn't have chomesh. And what's the reason for this? Sheken nitpas mi nitpas. Well, the reason is because, this is what I said a minute ago, which is both were taken from something that was already sanctified, and the sanctity was passed on to the middle one or was passed on to the last one. To which the Gemara continues to keep going around in circles a little bit. Adrabah. You can say the exact opposite. Let's compare it to the beginning stage of hekdesh, because then it moves on to something else that's sanctified. And just like beginnings, right? First stage hekdesh, it moves on to something else. And second stage hekdesh, it moves on to something else. If you add chomesh there, you should add chomesh there. To which they answer, fine. Forget this whole comparison. We can't really learn it the way we were trying to learn it, which is let's take what's true about the behemat me'ah and let's come up with our rule for that. But he says we're going to learn it for behemat me'ah, but in a bit of a different way. Kida amarava, ha'olah olah rishonah, just like Rava said somewhere else. The word ha'olah, this is in the pasuk about the korban tamid, the daily sacrifice that they would bring in the temple. And it was known that that was the first thing that was brought on the altar every day. And the reason they learned that is because the pasuk says, Ubi'el aleh kohen itzin, the kohen burns the wood on the altar, baboker, in the morning, va'ala arach aleha ha'olah. And the olah gets put, the olah is the olah tamid. And they say that's the one that was brought every day in the morning and in the evening. So now they say, ha'olah, Rava says, is olah rishonah. The ha'yidiyah, that the olah, means not just olah, but the olah. The olah means this is the one that goes first before everything else. So just like ha'olah means this is the one that goes first and it's different from everything else, or it's before everything else, ha'chanami hatme'ah rishonah. When it says the behemah hatme'ah, they're talking about first stage of sanctity, the first thing that was sanctified. And then we're basically saying that's the first one, and it only is talking about first stage sanctity in that pasuk, and therefore you add the chomesh only for first level and not for second level sanctity. And Tanya Kavate, to finish this up before we get to the next Mishna, we're going to have a braita that supports Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. And we're going to first get into some other things and then end the braita with the line that's important. So we're going to get a little off topic, although it's connected. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, this braita that's like Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, para zo tacha para shel hekdesh. If I say, I have so we're talking about moving sanctity. I have this cow, and I'm now going to take a different cow in its stead. So this para goes instead of this para of hekdesh. Or talit zo tacha talit shel hekdesh. Or this talit I sanctified, now I'm going to take a different one in its stead. So what happens? You basically move the sanctity from one to the other. What if it's not the same amount? So it doesn't matter, because the fact is, if I take a pruta, a very small amount, and I redeem it, I use it to redeem something that's worth a lot more, it's actually effective. And the sanctity is removed from the first object, even if the amount doesn't work out. So hekdesho padoi, the thing that was hekdesh is no longer hekdesh anymore. But yad hekdesh ala elyona. But if there was a discrepancy in the amount, the hekdesh wins out. What does that mean? It means that if the first animal was worth more and the second animal was worth less, I'm going to have to pay extra to compensate for the loss. And if it's the reverse, if the first animal was worth less and the second animal was worth more, I can't demand that money back from the temple. That belongs to the temple. The temple always wins out. If I said, this para is worth 5 slaim, and I'm going to take it in place of this other cow that was worth 5 slaim, and it happens the cow wasn't worth 5 slaim, okay, I was wrong about the amount. Or talitzo b'chamesh slaim tacha talit shel hekdesh, or again, this is again, second stage redeeming an item. Hekdesho padoi, even if I said the wrong amount, it's still effective. We don't say, oh, you made a mistake. No, still because as we said before, the same laws apply, even though I specified an amount and was wrong about the amount. And also, yad hekdesh ala elyona, like in the previous, even though it didn't say so. Now the braita ends with the line that we were looking for, which is the line that supports Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, al hekdesh rishon mosif chomesh, al hekdesh sheni mosif chomesh. So since they were talking about hekdesh sheni here, he said when you redeem hekdesh sheni, though, you don't add chomesh. Okay, you don't add that extra fifth. So with that, we finish up that sugya of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, where we had all these questions of why we're going to learn from that pasuk, which seems to be talking about first stage and second stage potentially. And yet we explained in the end, hatme'ah comes to say specifically first stage and not beyond it. Now, and then we brought a braita to prove Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. And with that, we're going to move on to the next Mishna. This Mishna is going to list a bunch of different things. So the first list, there's 2 lists in this Mishna. The first is amounts for various things. So this is going to be a repeat, some of this, of the first one, of certainly something we saw already on Daf Mem Tet. Ona'ah arba'a kesef. So ona'ah is 4 kesef. Okay, that's 4, right? Remember, 4 out of 24, right? The sela is 24 ma'ah, and the ona'ah is 4 ma'ah compared to 24 sela. Okay, so okay, so 4 me'ah with an ayin, right? It's not me'ah like 100. 4 me'ah to a sela is the amount of of ona'ah, that's basically, you charging, overcharging, or undercharging too much money, right? Overcharging, let's say, too much by too much money, by a sixth. Okay, that's 4 to 24 again. Kesef is a sela, is 24 ma'ah. So 4 to 24, it's 1/6. Hatana shtea kesef oda'ah shave pruta. If I make a claim in court and I say you owe me money, and you say, oh, you owe me 100, and you say I only owe you 10, I gave you back the rest. So that's called modeh b'miktzat. You admit to 90, you disagree about the 10. Okay, sorry, you admit to 10, you disagree about 90. Okay, it doesn't matter which direction, it doesn't matter how much, that's called modeh b'miktzat. What we're going to see now is in order. Now, what happens in that case is we're worried that you're lying entirely, or about the part that you already paid, and we make you take an oath on it. And then you can be exempt after you take the oath. At what point do we make you liable for this oath? Well, it has to be that my claim was at least 2 kesef, okay? And, which is right, 2 me'ah. And the hoda'ah is a shava pruta, okay? My admission, though, only had to be a pruta. So in other words, as long as I admit that I already, right, if I admit and I say, I owe you a pruta, but I don't owe you the rest, that's already modeh b'miktzat, even though a pruta to 2 me'ah is actually a very small percentage. Okay, so let's go through what it is. I hope I have this all right. 2 me'ah, right, okay, so a pruta, there's 8 prutot in an isar. And an isar is 4 times, me'ah is 4 times 4 isarim. So if you do 4 times 8, you get to 32. So in 1 me'ah is 32 prutot. So in 2 me'ah is 64 prutot. And if you do 1, you have 1 denial. You basically, you admit that you only owe 1 out of the 64 prutot. Basically, at that point, you're considered modeh b'miktzat. And since we mentioned prutot, we're now going to list chomesh prutot. And there's 5 laws that have to do with the pruta. Hoda'ah shave pruta, the first is the one we just said, that when I admit, it has to be at least a pruta, otherwise I'm not going to have to take an oath if I didn't admit to a pruta. And ha'isha mitkadeshet b'shava pruta, a woman gets betrothed with something worth a pruta, that we learned in Kiddushin. Ha'neheneh b'shava pruta min hekdesh ma'al, if you misuse consecrated property of the value of a pruta, then you're chayav b'me'ilah. If it's less than the value of a pruta, you're not liable for me'ilah, for misuse of consecrated property. Hamotzei shaveh pruta chayav lachriz. This we learned back in Aveda, that if you find a lost item, it has to be a shaveh pruta in order for you to be liable to pick it up and announce it and return it. Less than that, you don't need it. We learned that from either ne'avad mimenu, it was lost from him, or mitzata, and it was found. It has to be something of value that was lost, something of value that was found. Vagozelet chavero shaveh pruta, the 5th one, you steal a shaveh pruta from your friend, vinishvalo, and then you take an oath and say, I didn't steal it. And then you come and admit that you did. Or witnesses came. You have to return it, even as far as madah. You have to make sure that it gets to the hands of the person you stole it from. You can't send it to a shaliach, a messenger. You have to make sure it gets to them. Okay. Those are 5 halachot that have to do with a shaveh pruta. Any less than a shaveh pruta, these laws do not apply. So now the Gemara says, I don't understand why you're mentioning ona'ah. We already know ona'ah. Tanina chadazimna. We already learned this just a few dapim ago. Ha'ona'ah arba'ah kesef me'esrim va'arba'ah kesef l'sela. So there you have it. That's the amount of ona'ah. Why do we need it in our Mishna again? Right? And shtut lemekach. It's a 1/6 of the deal. Hata'anah shtea kesef oda'ah shaveh pruta itzrichale. They brought it because they wanted to introduce that as a way to get to the next halacha about the hoda'ah and the modeh b'miktzat. So then they say, what do you mean? Hanami Tanina, what do you mean? This isn't its place. That belongs in a Mishna and Shiur. And in fact, it is in a Mishna and Shiur. Shvuat dayanim, right? When the court imposes an oath, it's on this amount. So we already have that. So why did you bring the first line to bring the second line when you already have the second line somewhere else? So why are both these lines in the Mishna mentioned? And the real reason is, according to the Gemara, is they really wanted to get to this law about the 5 prutot. Now we're going to get to the law about the 5 prutot, and that's why they introduced it. They started with ona'ah to kind of do a transition to this other case of modeh b'miktzat, where it had a din about a pruta, and then it wanted to get to the 5 prutot. Now we're going to talk about the Mishna. The litnei nami ha'ona'ah pruta. Why don't you also say ona'ah is a pruta? So Amar Rav Kahana zot omeret ein ona'ah prutot. Rav Kahana says from here you can learn that even less than an isal, okay, there is no ona'ah for prutot, even the prutot b'pachot misar shu matbea shel kesef, right? They're saying, just let me check on the thing here. Just 1 second. Right, that there is no, right. In order, ein ona'ah prutot means that there is no ona'ah if you're dealing with prutot. There's no such thing. It has to be an isar. If it's not an isar coin and it's just prutot, it's those smaller coins like pennies type thing, right? There is no law of ona'ah. And that's why it doesn't mention this in the context of our Mishna of ona'ah and pruta. So then they say, the Levi amar yesh ona'ah prutot. Levi thinks even with prutot, if you cheat someone of a 6, you're liable. And thus Levi says in his version of the braita or the Mishna, his version of it, okay, he had a different source, different list of 5. He's also going to have 5, and we're going to see there's 2 differences. It's really 4 differences. There's 2 that are mentioned in our Mishna that he doesn't mention, and there's 2 that he mentions that our Mishna doesn't mention. So altogether 4 differences, and we're going to have to deal with what are these differences. So this is Levi's version. Chomesh prutoten, ona'ah pruta, that's difference number 1, because our Mishnah doesn't count that because they disagree about that point. Hoda'ah pruta, that's like our Mishnah. Kiddushay isha pruta, that's like our Mishnah. Kiddushin, betrothal. Gezel b'pruta, that's like our Mishnah. And yeshivat dayanim b'pruta. Here's the second difference. Judges don't sit to rule unless the case is of a pruta, that they're disagreeing about the 2 sides. Otherwise, the court doesn't sit on any sort of case that's less than a pruta. It's not worth their time and effort. So now we're going to have a question. Why did our Tana not mention those? And why did their Tana not mention ours? Okay, so the first one we know already, because our Tana thinks that there is no ona'ah for a pruta. Tana didam my Tana lo katana yeshivata dayanim. But why didn't they mention this thing about the judges? Tana le gezel. Tana le gezel. They learned the gezel case, the theft case. And from there, we learn that for a claim to be significant, it has to be a pruta. And from there, you can assume, and therefore the judges won't judge a case unless it's worth a pruta. Okay, so now they say, but if you're going to say you learn the yeshivat dayanim from the theft case, well then, and all the theft case is telling you is that any monetary claim is not going to be significant unless it's a pruta. Well then, milotani gezel v'katani aveda, but then you would, our Mishnah says gezel, it also says theft, and it also says finding lost items. Now, if gezel teaches you that anything worth a pruta is valid in terms of it being enough money for significance of anything, then it would be both for yeshivat dayanim and also for the aveda, for the lost item. You wouldn't need to list the lost item separately, which our Mishnah does. So hanach itzrichale. Well, you needed gezel and aveda separately because each one has some unique halacha to it. Let's see what they are. Hagozel, and that's why our Mishnah mentioned both, even though they didn't need to mention yeshivat dayanim because that was included, but these 2 each have their own unique halacha, and that's why they're each mentioned. Hagozel lechavero shaveh pruta v'nishbalo yolichenu acharav afilu lemadai. So gezel you need, why? Because you needed it to teach you that you actually have to return the object, even going as far as to madai. If the person you stole it from is living far away, you have to go all the way over there to return the lost item. That's a unique halacha by theft. Aveda, what is it coming to teach you? If you find it when it was worth a pruta, but then, well, we'll see. Chayav lachriz, you have to announce about it. Va'afagav dezal. Even if between the time that you found it, it then went down in value. We talked before about a case where in Metzia, where it was valued at a pruta when you lost it, then it went down and then it went back up by the time you found it. But there we learned that it has to be at the time you found it and at the time it was lost, there was a shefa pruta. But now we're talking about, what about the time you announce it? What if it already went down after you found it and went down in value? And that's what's coming to teach you. Yes, since you found it, it was a pruta, you have to return it. And that's why aveda was mentioned in our Mishnah to teach us that halacha. So we dealt with why our Mishnah didn't mention the 2 of Levi. Now we have to say, right again, ona'ah, because it doesn't believe there's ona'ah for a pruta, and yeshivat dayanim, because you could have learned it from gezel. Now we go back to Levi. Levi, my tamalotane aveda b'pruta. So what was Levi missing? Levi didn't have aveda, and Levi didn't have the hekdesh case. So now we're going to have to explain, right, the me'ilah. Why didn't Levi have aveda, and why didn't Levi have me'ilah, misuse of consecrated property? So First, we'll start with Aveda. Why didn't it have the lost item? Tana legezel. Because it says the theft case. So you can infer from the theft case the lost item case. So the Gemara is going to ask, obviously, well then, when we look at Tani Gezel, but Katani Shivata Dayanim, but doesn't it say Gezel and it also teaches you Shivata Dayanim in Levi's version? So if that's the case, if you can't learn Yeshivata Dayanim from Gezel, then you shouldn't be able to learn Aveda from Gezel. And each of these cases are unique, and you should have mentioned all three. So why is Aveda missing? To which they answer, well, really, you could have learned them both. But Yeshivata Dayanim eats Strichale. Specifically, he wanted to mention Yeshivata Dayanim. Lafuke midu Rav Katina, to say that he doesn't hold like Rav Katina. And why? What does Rav Katina say? Da Amar Rav Katina, Beitin nizkakin afilu lepachot mishav pruta. Rav Katina said, and we're going to get back to his statement soon and see if that's really what he meant, but Rav Katina says, even if it's less than a pruta, the court sits on it. And he wanted to say, no, we don't hold that way. And that's why it needed its own mention, but Aveda could have been learned out easily from Gezel. So now we have to figure out why he didn't mention the hekdesh case. Levi, my tamalokatani hekdesh, if you misuse consecrated property, you're only going to be liable if it's a pruta. Well, b'chulin kamayre, b'kodshim lo kamayre. We have this very often. Kodshim and chulin are often two different worlds. This list had to do with chulin, non-sacred items. That it's a chulin, it's a hekdesh issue. It's all about sanctified items. That's a whole different world. That wasn't included in my list. My list was in Dine Mamonot, in the world of financial issues. Here's our list of pruta. Hekdesh, that's a whole different world. Elatana didan kamari b'kodshim. Well, what about our Tana? Our Tana does deal with kodshim. Well, if our Tana deals with kodshim, we're going to have a separate problem, which is nitne maaser b'pruta. Why didn't it say that maaser has to be a pruta? What does this mean? This means if you have maaser sheni produce and you want to redeem it onto a coin. So if you don't have produce worth a pruta, you can't redeem it onto that coin. It has to be produce worth a pruta to be able to redeem it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It's like you need enough of it to go onto something. So it should have said maaser is also in a pruta. Well, they say, Command Amar ein b'chum sho pruta. So they say, it must be that our Mishna mentioned hekdesh me'ila, but didn't mention maaser, holds that it has to be the chomesh has a pruta, which means that the maaser itself, maaser sheni, is redeemed at 4 prutot, because 4 prutot, and then a quarter of that is one more, right? So is basically a quarter of that is 1 pruta. So the chomesh has to be a pruta, but the actual fruits have to actually be worth 4 prutot, and that's why it's not on the list. To which they ask the obvious question: chomesh maaser b'pruta. If you're talking about laws that have to do with the pruta, so mention that the chomesh of maaser has to be a pruta in order for you to redeem it. So they say, Bikarna kamari b'chomesh lo kamari. This list is dealing with items themselves and not the added payment of the 5th. That's an extra payment. But the keren, the principle, the item itself, we're talking about has to be worth a pruta, and that doesn't. In the case of maaser, it has to be worth 4. Again, we must assume our Mishna holds that way. There's a debate about this. Okay, Gufa. Let's go back now. So what we did so far was we explained there's 2 versions of these 5 prutot. We explained the Mishna's version, we explained Levi's version, and why each one doesn't hold by the other. Right? There's 2 differences on each, which end up being 4 differences. Gufa. Now let's go into the statement of Rav Katina. Amar Rav Katina, Beitin niskakin afilu lepachot mishav pruta. So the Beitin sits even if it's less than a pruta. Mativ Rava brings the following source as a difficulty. Ve'et asher chatam min hakodesh yishalem. Okay, now the word ve'et is an additional word, which we're going to darshan, but that which you sinned from the kodesh, meaning you used it, yishalem, you should pay. To which they say, turning now to Amabet, lirabot pachot mishav pruta lahishavon. This teaches you that even if it's less than a shav pruta, you have to return. Okay, this means, by the way, the principle. You have to return. You don't have to do the chomesh and the sacrifice, but you would have to return the actual item. Now, what does this imply? That even though it's less than a shav pruta, you actually have to return the item. Well, hekdesh, lekodesh in, this seems to be unique halacha by sanctified items, but it wouldn't be true for other items, which means if you don't have to return it, then the Beit Din is not going to sit on it. So it sounds like for non-sacred items, the court doesn't sit for less than a pruta. So what's Rav Katina going to do with that? To which we change what Rav Katina said. If Rav Katina really said something like this, this is what he said. Amar Rav Katina, If I was having a court case with you and I demanded a certain amount of money from you, I said, you owe me. And it was a shava pruta. And the court is sitting on it because it's a shava pruta. And then you have a counterclaim and you say, well, you know what? You owe me money, but the claim you have against me is less than a pruta. Well, gomrim afilu lepachot mishava pruta. We allow, the judges will judge your case to basically deduct the amount that you're supposed to pay me based on your claim, even though your claim on its own couldn't be brought to court. But since we're already in court for something else, they'll accept your claim. And here's the summary of this, that the beginning of judgment, in order to start a case, you need a pruta. But what Rav Katina was saying is that to finish a case that you're already in, you can add another claim that is less than a pruta. Okay, new Mishna. Hamisha chumshinhim. Okay, we're in the counting Mishnah. We have 5 prutot, and now we have 5 cases where chomesh is added. Eluhen, ha'ochel truma. Okay, truma, if you eat truma, if you're a non-kohen and you eat truma, you have to add a chomesh. This comes from Vayikra, chapter 22, verse 14, which says, Ish ki ochal kodesh bishkaga. By the way, this is only bishkaga. If you unwittingly eat the truma, so you didn't realize this was truma, you ate it, you're not a kohen. V'yasaf chamishito alav. We're going to see that term in all these psukim that we're going to quote, all 5. And you add a 5th, v'natan the kohen et hakodesh, and then you have to pay it to the kohen, the amount that you ate. Now, once we have truma, we're now going to add a whole bunch of other things that are all considered truma in some way, even though there's no pasuk about them in the Torah, but the psukim do refer to them as truma or something in the root of truma, like laharim, which also comes from, which is like kain tarim, which is also like truma. So what's the next one? Truma maaser. That's if the Levi gets, when the Levi gets the tithe, we give the Levi a tithe. They have to take they have to give part of that, 1/10 of that to the kohen. That's called truma maaser. So also if a non-kohen eats this truma maaser, the same thing would happen. They'd have to add a 5th. Utruma maaser shel demai. And even if it's sefek, whether they took truma or not, you buy from an amaretz, you're not sure if they took truma or not. Now, truma generally they do take, but the maaser you don't think they took, and then once you take the maaser, you're going to have to give the truma on the maaser. That truma is truma, and if you eat truma, you're going to have to, again, if a non-kohen eats it, they're going to have to pay an extra 5th. We're going to get to this in the Gemara. It's a little bit strange, because this is only a rabbinic thing. It's not Torah law. It seems strange we would be so stringent and make you pay the chomesh on this. So we'll get back to that. V'chala v'bikurim, mosif chomesh. These are 2 other things that go to the kohen. The chala, the piece you remove from your chala and give it to the kohen, or the bikurim, the first fruits, go to the kohen. If some non-kohen eats them, because these are all in the truma family, so to speak, mosif chomesh. You have to add a 5th. Second category, hapoden nete revai. This is the 4th year fruits. When you plant a tree, the 4th year, you treat them kind of like maaser sheni, and we're going to see they do a gzera shava, which is the word appears by this, is kodesh, it's called. In Maaser Sheni, it also says Kodesh. So it's true for Maaser Sheni, is going to be true for this as well. This is you bring the 4th year fruits to Jerusalem and eat them in Jerusalem, just like Maaser Sheni. So we're going to see in a minute that Maaser Sheni, you have to add a 5th. And then we're going to learn from Gzera Shava that Neta Revai, you have to add a 5th. Okay, the Mishna doesn't tell us all this, but the background to this is that. Maaser Sheni, Shalom, Mosif Chomesh. If you redeem your own Maaser Sheni, you have to add a 5th. This comes from Vayikra, chapter 27, verse 31. And it says, "Ve'im ga'ol yig'al ish mi ma'asro." If you redeem your maaser, chamishito yosef alav. You have to add this 5th payment. Third, and then again, it says kodesh in the pasuk before that, and then we learn kodesh to neta revai, which also is called kodesh. Hapodet hekdeshom mosif chomesh. If you redeem something that you sanctified, you have to add a 5th. This comes from Vayikra, chapter 27, verse 15. Im makdish yig'al beito. If you redeem your house after you sanctified it, v'yasaf chamishit kesef erkacha alav v'hayali. Okay, so again, you have to add the 5th. Hanehanesh of a pruta min hekdesh mosif chomesh. If you do me'ila, you misuse consecrated property, you have to add a chomesh. So that's from Vayikra, chapter 5, verse 16. Ve'et asher chatam min kodesh. If you, that's the pasuk we quoted just before. Yishalem ve'et chamishito yosef alav, and again add the 5th payment. If you steal from your friend a shava pruta and you swear falsely, you have to add chomesh. This comes from that same chapter 5 in Vayikra, verses 21 to 24, where we've read these before. I'll read you part of them. There it doesn't mean me'ila, misuse of consecrated property. It means you did something bad against God, which is You denied having a pikadon of someone, and then it also says, or you oppressed, or you stole, etc. And then it says, or anything you swore falsely about, you have to pay the amount, and you have to add the fifth. Okay, so that's what we have, these 5 items, which again, branched out a little more into 5 because we learned from some to other things that are similar, and we have chomesh for all these 5 things. Starts the Gemara, and Rava says, Amar Rava, kasha leila Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar didn't understand. Truma maaser shel tamai. It's a weird case here. Why are we being so strict with it? Tamai is only the Rabbanit. We don't know. Maybe you did take maaser on it. Maybe the Amaretz did do it. So why are we being so strict about it? Did the Chachamim really make their laws as strong as Torah law? Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman says the name of Shmuel. Well, Hamani Rabbi Meir. In fact, yeah, Rabbi Meir. This Mishna matches Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said, yes, the rabbis strengthened their words like Torah law. And where do we see this, that Rabbi Meir did this? Well, Tanya says in a braita. Okay, the background to this is, if you learn Masechet Gittin, you might remember, it was one of the main central themes, especially in the beginning of the Masechet. If you bring a get from abroad, you have to say the words. When the shaliach brings the get, the messenger brings the get to the woman when she's living abroad. He says to her, or comes from abroad to Israel, he says to her, he said before the court, this was written in front of me, this was signed in front of me. There's a big machlok at Rava and Rabbi about what the reason is. Is it because we might not be able to find edim to validate the get, and therefore we have to establish that it's a good get in case the husband comes later and complains it's not a valid get and wants to cancel the get, mess up the wife. So we want to validate the get, or perhaps it's because out of Israel, they weren't careful about doing a get lishma. The get had to be written specifically for him and for her in their name, and outside of Israel, they weren't so careful about it, so we had to know that it was actually written lishma, and that's what they're testifying about. Okay. Why? Not so important for our purposes, but may as well learn something and review. So now the braita says, "Hamevi get mimidinat hayam." What if he brings a get from abroad? Nitanola, he gives it to her, v'lo amar la b'fanai nechtam, and he didn't say those words. Yotzi v'havlad mamzer. If she's remarried already, she has to get divorced. And if she has children, they're mamzerim, because she's really, in fact, still married to her first husband, because the get is totally invalid. Now, this is a rabbinic thing that they, right? This whole b'fanai nechtam, the rabbis instituted. And yet we're going to say that if you didn't do it, you're actually not going to be married, to the extent that, right, you're still married to your first husband, the get is no good, and we're going to make your children mamzerim. Now, we always try to avoid mamzerim if we can. So this is very strange. This is Divrei Rabbi Meir. Chachamim omrim, the rabbis say, no, ein avlad mamzer, we don't go that far. Ketzad yaseh, so what should you do? Yitzlena, this isn't important for our purposes, but the rabbis give a solution. Yitzlena mimena v'yachzor v'yanen ala b'fnei shnayim. Take it from her, give it back to her, and say in front of 2 people, b'fanai nechtav, fanai nechtam. Okay? And then we resolve it. But the Rabbi Meir, mishum delo amar la b'fanai nechtav, fanai nechtam, yotzi v'avlad mamzer, that sounds very extreme. Right? Just because you didn't say those words, what, we're going to make her get divorced from her current husband, and the children are now going to be mamzerim? And yeah, in fact, it's true. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir is consistent with his approach. Ta'amar Rav Hamnuna Mishmei Ula. Rav Hamnuna says in the name of Ula that Omer Haya Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was known to say, Kol ha'meshanemi matbea shetavu chachamim bigitin yotzi v'avlad mamzer. Anyone who changes from the rules that the rabbis instituted about get, yes, the get is invalid. The woman who's remarried is really not remarried. She has to get divorced from her husband. She's still married to the first husband, in which case any children she has with the second husband are actually mamzerim, because she was actually an eshet ish at the time. She was a married woman at the time. And here you see that Rabbi Meir was very strict when it came to even rabbinic things and gave them status of Torah law. So now we're going to start with a question on this. We're not going to finish the whole thing today. But Mativ Rav Shesha. Rav Shesha brings a Mishnah into mind, and then he's going to bring another Mishnah in Maser Sheni, and the combination of the two is going to show that Rabbi Meir is actually more lenient when it comes to rabbinic law than it is with Torah law. And the example he's going to bring is Demai, taking Maser on Demai, which is rabbinic, and that's what we were just talking about in our Mishnah. Where Demai, we're going to be strict as if it's Torah law, because that's Rabbi Meir, and here we see that Rabbi Meir was lenient about Demai. So, Mechalalin oto kesef al kesef. If you have Demai, okay, and then you took Maser Sheni, so you said, okay, I don't think the Am Haaretz necessarily did Maser Sheni. I'm going to do Maser Sheni. I'm going to take the Maser Sheni, I'm going to redeem it onto a coin, onto kesef, silver. You can then move it from the silver to silver again. You might remember, we learned that you can't really do this. Nechoshet al nechoshet. If you redeemed it onto copper coins, you can then move it onto other copper coins. Kesef al nechoshet. You could redeem it from fruits to money to copper, to silver to copper. Or nechoshet al perot, or you could do it from money to copper to fruits. Now there's a debate which isn't really connected to our topic, but once it's fruits, let's say you did fruits, copper, fruits, yachzor v'yifdeh al perot. So then you have to lifdot et haperot again. Before you go to Jerusalem, divrei Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir says, if you did it that way, well, before you go to Jerusalem, turn it onto a coin, because you're supposed to bring the coins to Jerusalem, not the fruits. Chachamim disagree and say, Chachamim omrim ya'alu perot v'yochlu b'Yerushalayim. No, if you really want to take the perot, I don't know why you would, but you want to schlep them, yeah, take them and eat them in Jerusalem, that's fine too. Right? Once you did fruits, coins, fruits, right, you can still take them to Jerusalem. Now, the big question, though, is Mima Chalalin Kesef al Nechoshet, and the commentaries say not only Kesef al Nechoshet, but Kesef al Kesef. But even Kesef al Nechoshet, you shouldn't be able to do. And how do we know you can't do them? V'hatnan, Sela Shama, it should be easier to do Kesef to Nechoshet, but even that we don't allow. Hatnan Kesef Shamasir Sheni V'Shalchulin Sheni Tarfu. If you have, this is a weird case, you have a coin, not weird, but a little bit complicated. You have a coin of Maser Sheni, and then you have another coin. So they're both a Sela. But one is Maser Sheni and one is not. And now they got mixed up and you don't know which is which. So how do you solve this problem? Well, mevi besela ma'ot. You take a sela's worth of coins, okay, smaller coins. You bring them. Omer, kol makom sheyeshna sela shemaser sheni mechulel el ma'ot halal. You have these two selas. You say, listen, wherever the kedusha is, I'm not sure on which coin, I'm now moving it onto those copper coins. And then you do that. You move it onto the copper coins. Those two are totally fine now. No sanctity on them. Then you say, uborer et hayafeh shebehen. Then you choose whichever sela is nicer. Umechalelin aleha. And then you put the sanctity back onto the sela. Because you want it to be back on the sela. And this is what they're going to explain. Mipnei she'amru, I'm now at the top of Nun Bava and Aleph. We'll just start here and then we'll finish. Mipnei she'amru mechalelin kesef al nechoshet midochak. Because you can move kesef to nechoshet and then also back to kesef midochak, if you're stuck. In other words, this is a situation where you're stuck, so we allow this. So the Gemara is going to say, right, we'll get back to this later, but they're going to say only midochak if you're really stuck. Otherwise, you can't do it. So if you can't do it, then how do we allow you to do it ideally in the Demai case, where it says you could just move anything to anything? Isn't it because that's the Rabbanit and this is Doraita? And what do you see? Rabbi Meir didn't make it stricter for rabbinic law like Torah law. And that's where we're ending with this question right now on the Rav Sheish had asked on Rabbi Meir. We'll see it more inside in tomorrow's daf. Okay, so quick review of today's daf. We started with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, the hekdesh rishon. You add chomesh, not hekdesh sheni. We figured out how we learned it from the pasuk be'ema hatzme'at. Took a little while to figure all that out. Then we brought a braita to support that, and then we moved on to the next Mishna, which had two parts. What's the minimum amount for ona'ah, and what's the minimum amount for, right, or what's the amount for ona'ah, what is considered ona'ah, and what amount of money needs to be used in order for you to be liable for the oath of the modeh b'miktzah. Once we got there, that your admitting had to be at least a pruta, right? The part that you admitted had to be a pruta in order to make you liable to take an oath on the rest. So we then said there's 5 things that need a pruta. And then we had the Levi's version and the Mishna's version, and we tried to figure out why each one didn't say they have the same list as the other. Then we moved to the 5 cases where you have chomesh. And then we had a problem. Rabbi Elazar asked this question that Rava quoted about the maaser of Demai. Why are we so strict with it that we make you pay the chomesh when it's only rabbinic law? And we said that's Rabbi Meir who holds that rabbinic law is treated as strictly as Torah law, and which is a whole interesting topic in and of itself. And then from there, we started questioning, wait a minute, we see he's actually lenient when it comes to Demai in a different place about something that we're more strict about, the Torah law of Maaser Sheni. How could that be if he holds that on rabbinic law, we're going to treat it as severely as if it was Torah law? Well, we will get back to that tomorrow. Wishing everybody a Chag Sameach, and we'll see you tomorrow. Just a reminder that during Pesach, there's no regular Zoom classes, so the Shiurim will be up early in the morning, but I will not be teaching live. Chag Sameach.